Some men retire in peace. They buy a house by the lake, take up fishing, maybe find God. But men like me, we do not get peace. We get hunted. For 30 years, I worked for a government branch so deep in the shadows, it might as well not exist. I was not military, not law enforcement. My job was simpler. I hunted things that should not exist. Creatures that slip through the cracks of reality. Things that the public dismisses as folklore, hallucinations, or wild animals. But I have seen them. I have killed them. And I have lost more than I care to count trying. My name is Jack Carter. Or at least, that was the name they gave me when I signed my first contract. It is not the one I was born with. Names get erased in this line of work. They become just another file in a classified report, buried under layers of red tape and half-burned documents. But I walked away. No one walks away. Except somehow I did, or at least I thought I had. Now I live in a quiet town no one has heard of, running a garage where the most excitement I see is changing a busted transmission or patching up some kid's flat tire. I keep my head down. I do not ask questions. I ignore the scars on my body, the memories that surface when the night gets too quiet. I tell myself that part of my life is over, but monsters do not forget, and neither does the dark. The rain started at sunset. A slow drizzle at first, then a steady downpour that turned the cracked asphalt road slick with water. I was locking up the shop when I heard the engine. A low rumble cutting through the storm. A truck. Old model, headlights flickering like dying embers. It rolled up to my garage, its tires crunching over gravel, the weight of it wrong. I knew something was off before the driver's door even opened. But it never did. The truck just sat there. Engine running, headlights dim. I stepped forward, wiping the rain from my face, peering through the windshield. The driver's seat was empty. No one inside. The keys were in the ignition, the radio playing a faint hum of static. And the truck was covered in blood, not rust, not mud, blood. Dark streaks ran down the hood, smeared across the doors, the kind of pattern you see when something is dragged, not splattered. I opened the driver's side door. The smell hit me first. Iron, decay, and something else, something old. On the seat, a leather-bound notebook. I picked it up, flipping through pages filled with frantic handwriting. One phrase repeated over and over. They found me. They found me. They found me. My fingers tightened around the pages. Because I knew that handwriting, I had seen it before, in old mission reports, on classified briefings. It belonged to a man who had been dead for 15 years, or at least he was supposed to be. A gust of wind rattled the shop's metal shutters. The storm had gotten worse. But the rain was the least of my concerns. Because as I turned, as I stepped back from the truck, I saw it. A symbol carved into the metal. Deep, jagged lines, carved by something not human, not a message, a warning. I knew that symbol. I had seen it on bodies before, on people who did not live long after it was marked. My mouth went dry. This was no ordinary truck. This was a message. They found me, and I was not alone anymore. The rain kept falling. I backed away from the truck, my pulse hammering, the notebook clenched in my hand. Something moved in the distance. At first I thought it was just the wind through the trees, the way the storm played tricks on the eyes. But then the street lamp flickered, and I saw them, figures, standing at the edge of the road, just beyond the reach of the light. Tall, wrong, their limbs too long, their heads tilted slightly, as if listening. I had seen them before, once, a long time ago. The last time, I had barely made it out alive. I had burned the bodies, buried the remains, made sure nothing was left. And yet, they were here, watching. One of them stepped forward, slow, measured. Its head turned unnaturally, its glowing eyes locked onto mine. Then it spoke, in a voice that was not its own. "We remember you, Jack." The storm howled through the trees. The lights flickered again, a stuttered heartbeat in the darkness. I reached for the shotgun beneath the workbench, my fingers cold, my breath slow. I had spent years running from this, but running was over. I racked the shotgun, the sound sharp against the night. "So you do." I stepped forward. "Let's finish this." The rain had not let up. It hammered against the roof of my garage, turning the ground into thick mud, drowning the silence I used to find comfort in. But I was not listening to the storm. I was staring at the truck, blood-streaked, empty, a remnant of something that should not exist. The driver was gone, but the engine was still running. The radio crackled, shifting between static and something almost human. A voice just below the threshold of understanding. The truck was old, an early 90s model, the kind you find in small towns driven by men who do not ask questions. But the symbol carved into the door did not belong to this world. It was a hunter's mark, and it was not meant for prey. It was meant for me. I stepped closer, shotgun loose in my grip. The storm should have washed some of the blood away by now, but it clung to the metal, soaked deep into the seams like it had been there for years. I reached for the handle, and the engine cut off. A sharp silence fell over the world. I exhaled slowly, keeping my breathing controlled, my movements measured. My gut was screaming at me to leave it alone, to walk away. But I had ignored signs like this before, and people had died because of it. I pulled the door open. The smell hit me first. Rot, copper, something wet and decaying. Not just blood, something else, something wrong. The seats were soaked, the dashboard sticky with dark smears. But there were no signs of a struggle, no broken windows, no claw marks inside. Whoever had been sitting here had not fought back. They had just vanished. And then I saw the notebook. A small leather journal, sitting perfectly upright on the passenger seat. Unopened, waiting. I reached for it. The moment my fingers touched the cover, the radio crackled back to life, not static this time. A voice, ragged, weak. "Jack!" I froze. The voice was familiar. It was a voice I had not heard in 15 years, a voice that should not exist anymore. I flipped open the notebook. The pages were filled with frantic, uneven handwriting, the same phrase over and over. "They found me." My pulse hammered in my skull. The ink was still wet. I stepped back, scanning the darkness beyond the garage lights. The rain came down in heavy sheets, making it impossible to see past the tree line. But I knew better than to rely on my eyes alone. I listened. The wind carried the sound of branches creaking, leaves rustling. But underneath it, something else. A low hum, like a whisper trapped beneath the world. It was coming from the woods. And then the lights flickered. Just once. A warning. I tightened my grip on the shotgun. My mind raced through possibilities, running through old mission files, old patterns. The symbol on the truck. I had seen it before, on men who had gone missing, on bodies that were never meant to be found, a brand, a message. I looked back at the notebook, flipping to the last written page. One final message. "Run!" The light outside died. The garage was plunged into darkness. And then I heard footsteps. Not one, not two, dozens. Software measured, moving in from all sides. The creatures had not just found me, they had been waiting. The first shadow passed by the edge of the light. Tall, thin, unnaturally still. The second was closer. And the third, it was right outside the garage door. I heard the wet tap of its fingers against the metal. Not scratching, not banging. Just tapping, like it was testing something. I kept my back against the truck, my breath controlled, heart pounding. I needed to get to the cabin. Weapons, supplies, a plan. But they already knew where I would go. They had been inside my house before, waiting. The tapping stopped. The silence stretched too long, pressing against my ears like something alive. And then, a whisper, software familiar. "Jack, let us in." The voice was mine. My stomach turned to ice. I did not wait. I moved. One shot into the air. The sound shattered the silence like breaking glass. The creatures flinched, their shadows recoiling for just a second, just enough time. I sprinted for the truck, my boots skidding against the wet ground. My hands fumbled with the keys still in the ignition. The engine roared to life. The headlights cut through the storm, and for the first time, I saw them clearly. Dozens, tall, humanoid, but wrong. Their eyes burned red. Their mouths, there were no mouths, just smooth, empty skin where their faces should have been. They stood motionless, watching. And then, one of them turned its head too far, bending in a way no human could. It took a single step forward, and they all moved at once. The truck's tires spun against the wet ground. I slammed the gas. The first creature lunged, its fingers scraping the metal as I peeled out of the garage. They were fast, too fast. Shapes blurred past the trees, keeping pace, their glowing eyes flickering in and out of the darkness. The radio crackled again. A new message, a voice I did not want to hear. "You should not have left, Jack." The storm swallowed the sound. Lightning split the sky, and the road ahead vanished into the dark. The road stretched ahead, slick with rain, swallowed by darkness. The storm had turned violent. Wind howled through the trees, branches bending, snapping like brittle bones. But I barely heard it over the pounding in my chest. I had been in danger before. I had faced things that most people could not even begin to comprehend. But this was different. This was personal. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles bone white. The truck's wipers struggled against the rain, but it did not matter. The road was secondary. What was behind me was the real threat. I glanced at the rearview mirror. Nothing. But I knew better than to trust my eyes, because I could feel them, keeping pace, just beyond the edges of my perception. I pushed the gas pedal harder. The truck roared forward, tires skidding over the wet asphalt. Every instinct screamed that I was heading straight into a trap, but I had no choice. I could not fight them in the open. Not like this. I needed a plan. And there was only one place I could go. The old hunting cabin, the one I swore I would never return to. 15 years ago, I had been sent to this region on a mission. A remote outpost had gone silent, something that was never supposed to happen. By the time we arrived, there was nothing left. No bodies, no blood, just empty rooms, still warm cups of coffee on tables, as if the people inside had simply vanished in the middle of their day. The only thing we found was a symbol, carved into the walls. The same symbol that had been on the truck tonight. That mission ended in fire. We had burned the whole place to the ground, convinced that we had wiped out whatever had done it. But I knew now. We had only delayed the inevitable. A shape flickered in the distance, just beyond my headlights. At first it looked like a deer, a large silhouette standing in the middle of the road, unmoving, unbothered by the truck hurtling toward it. But as I closed the distance, the shape changed, stretched. Its limbs grew longer, its head tilted, too far, too sharp, like a puppet with broken strings. I knew what it was. I had seen them shift before, and I knew better than to stop. I kept my foot on the gas, heart hammering, bracing for impact. And then, the thing vanished. Not into the trees, not under my tires. It simply ceased to be, as if it had never been there at all. I swallowed back the rising nausea. They were playing with me, testing me, reminding me that they had control. A mile out from the cabin, the rain began to slow. The storm had not passed. It had simply paused. Everything was too quiet. The only sound was the low growl of the truck's engine and the steady thump-thump-thump of my pulse in my ears. Then, up ahead, a figure, standing dead center in the road, not a shifting shadow, not one of those things. A man. He did not move, did not flinch as my headlights washed over him, revealing soaked clothes, a tattered jacket, and an all-too-familiar face. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded, tires screeching against the wet road. My hands locked around the wheel as the vehicle came to a halt just feet from him. I stared. He stared back. And I felt my stomach drop, because I knew him, even though I had seen him die 15 years ago, even though I had watched his body burn. He was standing right in front of me, alive and smiling. I did not move, did not breathe. The man tilted his head, rain dripping from his chin. His expression was wrong, his smile stretched too wide. His eyes empty, lifeless. But he spoke, in the same voice I remembered. "Jack." The sound sent ice through my veins. I forced myself to swallow, to steady my voice. "You're dead." He blinked, slowly. Then he laughed. Not a human laugh. A dry, hollow sound, like wind moving through bones. Then he spoke again. And yet, here I am. I reached for my shotgun. My hands were steady, my breath controlled. But deep down, I already knew. Bullets would not work. Because this wasn't him. Not really. I had seen this before. I had killed things that could mimic voices, steal faces. And the worst part, they always stole the ones that would hurt the most. The silence stretched between us. The dead man did not blink, did not breathe, just stood there, waiting. I could hear the forest behind him, the soft movement of unseen things creeping closer. The creatures had sent him ahead. A final warning. I took a breath. I stepped out of the truck. Shotgun raised. I met his hollow gaze, and I asked the only question that mattered. "What do you want?" His smile widened, and in a voice that was almost his, but not quite. He answered, "To bring you back." The dead man did not move. Neither did I. Rain pattered softly against the road, turning the dirt into black mud, sliding in slow rivulets down the corpse's cheeks. But his eyes, they did not blink. I knew better than to trust appearances. This wasn't him, not really. I had watched the real him die. I had burned the body myself. But the thing standing in front of me, it wore his skin like a souvenir. Its lips curled into that same wrong smile. Not an imitation, not a disguise. Something else, something worse. "To bring you back," it had said. And it was still waiting for an answer. I adjusted my grip on the shotgun, keeping the barrel trained center mass. "Who sent you?" The thing in his skin tilted its head. The movement was slow. Too slow, like it was learning how bones were supposed to bend. A long silence. And then, it spoke again, but not in his voice, not anymore. This time, it was my voice. "You know who." A muscle tensed in my jaw. They had never done this before, never mimicked me. I steadied my breathing, forced my pulse to slow. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to be afraid. I swallowed the fear down. I did not blink, neither did it. Then, it took a step forward, just one, just enough. And my finger tightened on the trigger. The shotgun roared. A blast of buckshot tore through the thing's chest, flinging it backward into the mud. The echo of the shot faded into the storm, swallowed by the trees. I did not hesitate. I pumped another round into the chamber, stepping forward, keeping my aim steady. One shot would not do it. I knew that. I had learned that the hard way. But as I reached the body, shotgun raised. It was gone. No blood, no sign of impact, just an empty patch of mud where it had fallen. I exhaled sharply, my muscles locked, not fear, instinct. And then I heard it, a whisper, not from in front of me, from behind, close, too close. Missed me. The voice came from directly over my shoulder. I spun, shotgun snapping up. But there was nothing there, nothing at all. And that was the moment I realized I had made a mistake. A branch snapped, not from the road, from the tree line. And then another, and another. Not twigs, not wind. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from all sides. They had never meant to fight me here. They had meant to lead me here. I took a step back toward the truck, a second, another. And then, a figure stepped out of the woods, not the mimic. Something else, something bigger. I had fought these things before, but never one like this. The others were tall, lanky, twisting shadows with glowing eyes and wrong smiles. But this one was different. It was built like a man, broad shoulders, thick limbs, but its skin was wrong, not stretched, not rotting, not dead. This one was growing. Its flesh shifted beneath the surface, like it wasn't finished yet, like it was still deciding what it wanted to be. It watched me, studying, like it was remembering, like it was learning. I was out of time. The truck was 15 feet away. The creature was 10. It did not move. But I knew the moment I ran, it would. I had only one shot left, literally. I needed to make it count. I raised the shotgun. The thing smiled. Then, I fired at the headlights. Glass shattered, light exploded. And in that instant, I ran. I sprinted for the truck, boots skidding in the mud, lungs burning, heartbeat pounding. Behind me, the creature let out a sound. Not a roar, not a snarl. Something worse, something human. Laughter. The driver's door was unlocked. I threw myself inside, slammed it shut, turned the key. The engine coughed. Once, twice. The laughter grew louder, and then the truck roared to life. I hit the gas. Mud sprayed as the tires spun, gripping the road, tearing forward. The rearview mirror was a mistake, because I saw them. All of them. Hundreds. Standing at the tree line, watching me leave. And the biggest one, the one that had almost finished growing, it lifted its hand and waved. The rain hammered against the windshield. The storm swallowed the road behind me. But I could still feel their eyes, still hear the laughter, still see the mark carved into my skin, one I had never noticed before tonight. A new brand, a new message. They were not just hunting me, they were claiming me. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I could win. The highway stretched ahead, empty and endless. Rain pounded against the windshield, turning the world into a smear of darkness and flashing headlights. The truck's wipers struggled against the storm, but I barely noticed. My mind was somewhere else. Back on that road, back in the woods, back to the thing that wore a dead man's face. I clenched the wheel tighter. My knuckles were bone white, my pulse a steady drum in my ears. I needed answers, and there was only one person left who might have them. Sarah Whitmore. She had been my partner once, one of the best hunters I had ever known. She got out before I did, vanished off the grid long before I even thought about retiring. But I had always known where she was, because men like me do not leave loose ends. Sarah had chosen isolation, a cabin deep in the Appalachian foothills, far from cities, far from people, far from things that should not exist. The kind of place where no one could hear you scream. It took me 3 hours to reach her. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time I pulled off the road, following a narrow dirt path through the trees. The tires crunched over gravel, headlights illuminating twisted branches that looked too much like reaching fingers. Her cabin was just ahead. Lights were off. No smoke from the chimney. But she was here. I knew it the moment I stepped out of the truck. The feeling of being watched was stronger than before. Not like in the woods, not the creatures. This was different. A sharpened awareness, a hunter's gaze. I barely had time to knock before the door swung open. And there she was. Sarah looked exactly the same. Not younger, not older, just the same. Like time had stopped for her the moment she walked away. Her eyes scanned me like I was a threat, like she was already deciding whether or not she would let me in. Then she spoke. "You led them here." Not a question, a statement. I did not argue, because she was probably right. The cabin was smaller than I expected, cluttered but not messy, books stacked in uneven piles, maps pinned to the walls, notes scrawled in the margins of old files. This was not retirement, this was preparation. She had been waiting. I sat at the old wooden table, watching as she poured a drink. Not coffee. Whiskey. She slid the glass toward me, then leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Tell me." So, I did. I told her about the truck, the symbol carved into the metal, the missing driver, the dead man standing in the middle of the road. The way they moved now, the way they spoke, the one that was still growing. She listened, did not interrupt, did not blink. And when I was done, she exhaled slowly. Then she said something I did not expect, something I did not want to hear. "Jack, they've been waiting for you." I felt something cold settle in my chest. She moved across the cabin, pulling an old metal box from beneath a pile of documents. She placed it on the table between us, flicked the latch, and opened it. Inside, a stack of classified documents, all marked with a single word: Project Revenant. I frowned. That name, I had seen it before, years ago. It had been buried deep in old case files, mentioned only in passing. A project that was never supposed to exist. Sarah slid a folder toward me. I opened it, and I felt my stomach drop, because the first page was a photo of me, taken recently. I looked up at her. She met my gaze. "They never let you leave, Jack. You just didn't know it. The government never stopped hunting. The program did not end when we walked away. It evolved, changed, adapted. Sarah had spent years unraveling the pieces, and the truth was worse than we had imagined. The creatures were not just hunting us, they were learning from us, studying, waiting, because we were the only ones who had ever truly understood them, and we had been marked for something bigger. I flipped through the file, more photos, more names, all men like me, all retired, all missing. Sarah tapped a page near the bottom, a map, a location circled in red. "This is where they want you to go." I exhaled slowly. My hands were steady, my breath controlled. I looked up at her. "What's there?" She did not answer right away. Then, "A facility." I frowned. "Whose?" She hesitated, and when she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than before. "Ours." A pause. Then, she slid something else across the table. Something old, something I had not seen in 15 years. A badge, mine, from before, stamped with the same symbol that had been carved into the truck, the same mark I had seen on the bodies, the same one that was now burned into my skin. I swallowed hard. "What the hell did we do?" Sarah exhaled, and then she said the last thing I wanted to hear. "We opened the door." I stared at the old badge. The metal was tarnished, the edges worn. But the symbol on it, the same one I had seen carved into the truck, burned into my skin, was still clear. I turned it over in my hands. It felt heavier than it should, like it was holding something more than its weight, like it was holding a truth I did not want to face. Sarah watched me from across the table, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Finally, she said, "We need to go there." I shook my head. We need to burn it down. She exhaled, rubbing her temples. Jack, listen. I cut her off. Number you, listen. We were never supposed to survive this. We were supposed to be part of it. She said nothing, because she knew I was right. But knowing the truth was not enough. We needed a plan, a way to end this before it ended us. The facility was buried deep in an abandoned mining town, miles from any major roads, a place forgotten by history, or, more likely, erased from it. Sarah spread a map across the table, tracing a path with her finger. Here, she said. This is the entrance. A tunnel leading underground. I knew the layout before she even spoke, because I had been there before. Not as an outsider, not as a hunter, as part of the project. I clenched my jaw. What's inside? She hesitated, and that was enough of an answer. Finally, she said, We don't know. Not anymore. I frowned. What do you mean, not anymore? Sarah sighed, pushing the file toward me. The last transmission came 12 years ago. I flipped through the pages. Old reports, redacted statements. But one thing stood out. No bodies were ever found. Not of the scientists, not of the agents, not of anything. The entire facility had simply gone dark, and no one had ever gone in to find out why. Until now. We spent the next few hours gathering supplies, not just weapons, tools, equipment, anything that might help us understand what we were walking into. UV lights, modified rounds, old research files, and something else, something I had not used in years. A recorder. I placed it in my pack, tightening the straps. If we did not make it out, someone needed to know what we had found. Someone needed to hear it. Sarah and I had hunted together long enough to know that survival depended on one thing. Rules. We set 3 before heading out. 1, we stay together, no matter what. 2, we don't trust what we see, only what we hear. 3, if we hear our own voices, we run, because if they spoke in our voices, it meant we were already dead. We left at dusk. The truck rumbled over broken roads, headlights cutting through the mist rolling in from the hills. Sarah drove. I checked the ammo. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence was already full of things we didn't want to say. The creatures had been toying with us, waiting. Because they knew where we were going. They had always known, and they were letting us come to them. The closest town had been abandoned for years, empty buildings, collapsed rooftops, a gas station with a sign that still creaked in the wind. I stepped out of the truck, adjusting my gear. Sarah followed, scanning the darkened streets. Then, she muttered, We're not alone. I didn't need to ask how she knew. I felt it too. Something was watching. From the rooftops, the alleys, the windows that should have been empty. But we didn't look. We didn't stop. Because stopping meant giving them time. And time was something we didn't have. We reached the mouth of the tunnel just before midnight. An old steel door, rusted but still intact. A faded symbol painted across it. The same one on my badge. Sarah exhaled. Last chance to turn around. I met her gaze. There's no turning back. She nodded. Then, without another word, she pushed the door open, and we stepped inside. Into the dark, into the place where it all began, where the hunt had never really ended. The door closed behind us. The tunnel stretched forward, swallowing our light. Somewhere ahead, a whisper. Not a human voice, not an animal. Something else, something waiting. Then, the radio crackled to life. A voice came through. Familiar. Too familiar. Welcome back, Jack. The tunnel swallowed us whole. The moment we stepped inside, the air changed. Heavy, stagnant. Wrong. The kind of air that had not been touched by wind, by sunlight, by life, in a long time. Sarah closed the steel door behind us. The sound echoed through the corridor, deep and hollow, like we had just sealed our own tomb. Ahead, the passage sloped downward, and somewhere in the dark, a voice had spoken my name. I flicked on my light. The beam cut through the black, revealing rusted walls lined with decayed wiring. Old warning signs, biohazard symbols, and something else. Something new. Scratches in the metal, carved deep, uneven. Not words, not symbols. Claw marks. Sarah exhaled sharply. This place should be empty. I glanced at her. It isn't. The deeper we went, the worse it got. The tunnel opened into a wide chamber lined with abandoned research stations, shattered monitors, long-dead equipment. A control room sat against the far wall, windows overlooking a vast underground containment area. And that was where we saw them. Lining the walls. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Empty cages, some torn open from the inside, others from the outside. The locks had not been broken. They had been melted, like something had burned through them. And all of them, were empty. Sarah moved toward one of the control panels, dusting off the console. Surprisingly, it still had power. The monitor flickered, a corrupted interface, old security logs. But one thing stood out, a final recording. Date, 12 years ago. Status, last transmission. Sarah hesitated, then pressed play. At first nothing, just static. Then, a voice, frantic, terrified. We can't stop them. We can't contain them. The sound of gunfire, screams. Then another voice, calm, deliberate. A scientist. They learned too quickly. We didn't anticipate. A wet snap, a gurgling choke. More gunfire. Then, silence. But before the feed cut out, one final sentence. A whisper from someone who was still alive. If you hear your own voice, it's already too late. The screen died. Sarah turned to me. Neither of us spoke. We did not have to, because we were not alone anymore. A sound came from the far corridor. A scraping, slow, deliberate. I raised my shotgun. Sarah lifted her rifle. The scraping stopped. Then, something stepped into the light, and my stomach dropped. It looked human. It wasn't. Tall. Too tall. Limbs slightly too long. The face was familiar, but empty. It was wearing the shape of a man. Not the skin, not the voice, just the idea of one. It studied us, not moving, not breathing, waiting, testing. Then, it smiled, and the lights went out. Gunfire lit up the dark. Sarah's rifle roared, rounds slamming into the creature's chest. It barely flinched. I fired twice. The first shot missed. The second tore through its leg. It stumbled, but didn't fall. And then it spoke, not in a scream, not in a growl, but in my own voice. Jack. My blood ran cold. Sarah turned, her face pale. Because from the opposite corridor, another one stepped forward, wearing her face. More movement, more figures emerging from the shadows. Too many. They had been waiting. They were ready. I grabbed Sarah's arm, dragging her back toward the control room. We barricaded the door just as the first impact slammed against it. The metal groaned. Sarah was breathing hard, hands shaking as she reloaded. I checked my rounds. 6 shells. Not enough, not even close. I turned to Sarah. We don't make it out of here, do we? She did not answer. Then, a whisper. From inside the room, not from me, not from her, something else. And it was laughing. The door buckled. The walls shook. The creatures were already inside. I lifted my shotgun. Sarah raised her knife. We stood back to back. And as the first one lunged, the screen cut to black. The barricade wouldn't hold. The steel groaned under the weight of the creatures outside. They weren't mindlessly clawing at the door. They were testing it. Feeling for weakness. Learning. Sarah and I stood back to back, weapons raised, breath controlled. We had faced things like this before, but never this many, and never ones that wore our own faces. The whisper still echoed in the room, curling around the edges of the dark. A voice that wasn't mine, a laugh that wasn't hers. The realization hit me like a hammer to the chest. They were already inside, and they were waiting for something. A sharp click broke the silence. Not from the door, not from the vents, from behind me. Sarah's gun, safety off. I tensed. "Jack," she said. Her voice was calm, too calm. "Put the shotgun down." I didn't move. The whispering grew louder. I turned my head slowly, keeping her in my peripheral. She had the rifle raised, but she wasn't aiming at the door. She was aiming at me. My grip tightened around the shotgun. I had fought monsters before, but I had never fought a human, until now. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked. Sarah didn't blink. I saw the answer in her face before she said it. "I had to," she whispered. My stomach turned. She had known this would happen. This wasn't a mission. It was a delivery, a sacrifice. They hadn't been hunting me. They had been waiting for me to come back. And she had brought me here. I exhaled slowly. "You were never off the grid." She didn't answer. Didn't need to. I shook my head. "You weren't hiding from them. You were working with them." Sarah's expression didn't change. "You don't understand, Jack." I laughed. A dry, hollow sound. "I understand enough." My grip on the shotgun didn't loosen, but neither did hers. The door groaned again, metal buckling. The creatures were getting in, and I had wasted too much time. I swallowed the anger. I swallowed the betrayal. None of it mattered anymore. We were seconds from dying. There was only one question left. "Why?" Sarah sighed, lowered her weapon, and then she said the words I never expected. "Because you were the first, Jack." The air froze. My pulse stopped. I stared at her, not understanding. Not yet. She took a slow step forward. "Did you ever wonder why you survived when the rest of us didn't?" My mouth went dry. "You think you retired because you got lucky?" A sick feeling twisted in my stomach. Sarah tilted her head. "You never really retired." She was smiling now. "You just woke up." The whispering in the room stopped. The creatures outside stopped. Everything stopped, like the world was holding its breath. And I understood. Too late. My hands shook, because the real enemy wasn't outside. It was inside me. It had always been inside me. And now, it was waking up. Sarah smiled. She had known all along. This wasn't a hunt. This wasn't a fight. It was a return. I wasn't here to stop them. I was here to join them. And deep down, some part of me wanted to. The door behind us shattered, and everything went dark. The door shattered. The air rushed in, cold and heavy, filled with the scent of rot and something older than death. Shapes moved in the dark. Tall. Too tall. Their limbs bent the wrong way, heads tilting in a slow, unnatural rhythm, their glowing eyes locked onto me. But they didn't attack. They just stood there, waiting. Sarah stepped closer. "Jack," she said softly, like a mother calling a child home, like she knew what was coming. And then I felt it, deep inside my chest, a pull, a memory I had never remembered before. Something awakening, something breaking free. I fell to my knees. The room spun. The whispering wasn't outside anymore. It was inside my head, inside me. And it had always been there. The truth crashed over me like a wave. Sarah hadn't betrayed me. She had been helping me see. I hadn't survived the hunt all those years ago because I was lucky. I had survived because I was never meant to die, because I was never human to begin with. The creatures weren't hunting me. They were calling me home. I clutched my chest, my breath ragged. The whispers were louder now, and they were speaking my name, over and over, like a song, like a welcome. I looked up at Sarah. She smiled. "You feel it, don't you?" she whispered. I didn't answer, couldn't, because the moment she said it, I knew she was right. I could feel my body changing, something inside me shifting, unlocking, breaking apart only to rebuild itself. Like I had been asleep for years, like I was finally waking up. I stared at my hands. For a moment, they still looked like my hands, but only for a moment. I could see the skin rippling, something underneath, something trying to come through. Sarah knelt beside me. "You can fight it," she said. Her voice was gentle. "Or you can become what you were always meant to be." I swallowed hard. Fighting felt like trying to hold back the tide, like trying to deny gravity. I had been running my whole life, but running was over. I looked at Sarah one last time, and I made my choice. The creatures moved forward, slow, deliberate, surrounding me in a perfect circle. Their voices blended together in a sound I had no words for. It wasn't a song, it wasn't speech, it was recognition. I felt my heart beat slow, then stop, and when it started again, it wasn't mine anymore. The last thing I saw was my own reflection in Sarah's eyes, and it wasn't human, not anymore. Then, everything went dark. No one ever found the facility. No one ever found Sarah, and no one ever found me. Because Jack Carter didn't exist anymore. But the creatures, they did, and they still do. And now, I am one of them.
Did Jack choose to become one of them, or did he have no choice? Was he always a monster, or did the creatures change him? Comment your theories below. Don't forget, like and subscribe. Thank you.